talk about the geometric mean. So geometric mean of any two numbers, simply put, let's say if we wanted to find the geometric mean of A and B, would be equal to the square root of A times B. Now, one thing that we get when we have a triangle like this is a very special triangle. We notice that we have a right angle that is being cut by an altitude. An altitude is when you have a line that passes through the vertex of one of your angles on your triangle and makes a nice right angle with the other side of your triangle. Now, whenever you have an altitude on a right triangle, the distance from that vertex that is a right angle to the hypotenuse is actually equal to the geometric mean of your two pieces of your other side. So we know that x is equal to the square root of 45 times 5, which if we plug that into our calculator, we get 15. Cool. Okay, look at this one. Is it the same situation? Yes, it is. So in this case, x is equal to the square root of 96 times 6. Which is 24. Now this situation is different. I want you to notice. Is x the altitude anymore? No. So now all we know is that 4 is equal to the square root of 1 times x. Okay, how are we going to solve for x, guys? Right now, we're taking the square root of x, so what we're going to do is we are going to square each side. Because just how we used the square roots to cancel out squared before, we can use the squared to cancel out square root. So what's 16 squared? Sorry, what's 4 squared is 16. And then we'll have 1 times x. And 1 times x is just x, so that's kind of being redundant, but let's write it anyways. X is 16. So in this case, we had to do a little bit of algebra. Okay, similar situation here. We know that this time 4 is equal to the square root of 2 times x. Just like before, we're going to use squaring to cancel out the square root, and we're going to get 16 is equal to 2 times x. In order to solve for x, we'll divide by 2 on each side. And this time, x is equal to 8. This one doesn't involve the altitude. Well, that's kind of upsetting. How are we going to solve? Well, there are 2 methods we could use. We could either use Pythagorean theorem inside this triangle in order to solve for a leg, and then we could use our altitude rule, or we could set up ratios. Let's go ahead and use the Pythagorean theorem first. So I know 64 squared plus, we'll decide that to be squared, equals 80 squared. Notice how there's a right triangle inside of a right triangle. So 64 squared is 4,096 plus b squared, which is equal to 80 squared, which is 6,400. Let's minus our 4,096 from each side. B squared is going to be equal to 2,304. Let's go ahead and take the square root of each side in order to solve. And b will be equal to 48. Okay, cool. So I can go ahead and erase that question mark and write 48. Notice that I'm not done yet because I still don't know what x is. I just know now what my altitude is. So now I can solve. I know that 48 is equal to the square root of 64 times x. Go ahead and square each side to solve. 48 squared, we should probably know from the problem we just solved, is 2304 equals 64 times x. Let's divide by 64 on each side. We're going to get 36 equals x, and now we're done. So there's quite a bit using the geometric mean and the Pythagorean theorem in order to solve a question like this. Remember, I said you could solve that question using the Pythagorean theorem, or we could use ratios. Now, the next question is, how many triangles do you see here? Well, I see one right triangle, two right triangles, and three right triangles. I'll just kind of write the three here. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to separate those. So right now they're stacked, but if I unstack them, what's that going to give me? Now, do I know the sides of the big red right triangle, triangle number 3? Well, I know one of the legs is 180, and it looks like the hypotenuse is made up of two pieces, 162 plus x. Okay, let's go ahead and draw out triangle number 2. What sides do I know in triangle number 2? Well, I know the hypotenuse for this one is 180, and I know that bottom leg is 162. And then finally, let's draw our tiny triangle. And I know this side is x. Okay, now, two of those triangles, we're going to be able to set up ratios off. One of them is useless. Well, the one that is useless is actually the first one. Notice how we know the hypotenuse for the other two. These two will correspond. And I know the longer leg. So those two correspond, which means I can set up a ratio in order to solve. So I'll start with my red triangle, 162 plus x over 180. And 162 plus x, that's the hypotenuse, that corresponds to 180. And 180 is your short side, so that corresponds to 162. Now we can cross multiply. And 162 times 162 is going to equal 26,244. Oh, so that's 126 times 126. Sorry, 162 times 162 plus 162 times x is just 162x. And that's going to be equal to 180 times 180, which is 32,400. Okay, because of all the pictures I've drawn, I'm actually running out of space. So I'm going to come up over here to finish this problem. Copying it down, so I'm not changing anything yet. Okay, so what I need to do is first subtract. I'm going to subtract 26,244 from both sides. That'll cancel. 162x is equal to 6,156. Let's divide by 162. Divide by 162. And that's going to give me an x value of 38. So again, you can use the Pythagorean. You can use the Pythagorean theorem and the geometric mean, or you can use ratios. Whichever one works better for you is the way to approach the problem. Okay, let's do one final one. I think I will use the ratios again on this one. Now, I'm going to look at my big triangle first. So looking at my big triangle, I see my long leg is x, and my short leg, sorry, not my short leg. I don't know anything about my short leg, but my hypotenuse is 144 and 81. Well, 144 plus 81 is equal to 225. So I'm going to write that down. And then I'm going to look at my medium-sized triangle. Now I know my long leg here is 144, and my hypotenuse here is x. Okay, I can set up a trig ratio, not a trig ratio, I can set up a ratio in order to solve with just those two triangles, so I'm not even going to bother making my little triangle. So I know I'm going to start with 225 over x. 225 is the hypotenuse. That corresponds to x. So I'm going to write down x. X is the long leg in terms of this ratio and corresponds to 144. So I can go ahead and cross multiply. X times x is x squared. 225 times 144 equals 32,400. And it's really nice on this one that there was no plus x, so I didn't have to do any distribution. So my final step here in order to solve is just going to end up being taking the square root. And that's going to give me an x value of 180. Excellent. That's all for today. Good luck with geometric mean.